Good evening, everyone. I am Kathy Parisian, and on behalf of the Bibliographical Society of America, I'm pleased to welcome you to Publishing in Pbsa, Ask the Editors with David Gants and Meaghan Brown. Before we begin, let me remind you that this event is being recorded and that by participating, you agree to abide by the BSA Events Code of Conduct. I will put the link to the Code of Conduct in the chat. The BSA conducts its business on the traditional and ancestral lands and waters of the Lenape people and Lenape-Hoping in Brooklyn, New York. I am streaming from Nellies Ford, Virginia, on the traditional lands of the Monacan people. The Society gathers people together at events like this one across the North and South American continents on the traditional and ancestral lands and waters of indigenous peoples who were forcibly removed from their lands. We acknowledge the exclusion and erasures of indigenous peoples in the places where we work and gather. And we encourage you to type your local land acknowledgement into the moderated chat on your screen and share it with our community. This event is being closed captioned by a live captioner in English with a machine-generated translation of those captions in Spanish. I will be sharing a link for Spanish captions in the chat. I'd like to thank our captioner for their work in making this event accessible. Today's event will conclude with a question and answer period. To submit a question to our speakers, please enter it into the Q&A box. All attendees can see, comment on, and upvote questions, and we ask that you do this to help us prioritize our questions of greatest interest to today's audience. We also encourage you to engage in conversation using Zoom's chat feature during today's talk. However, if you submit a question via the chat, I will ask you to re-enter it into the Q&A box. Before we begin, I would like to thank our co-sponsor, the University of Chicago Press Journals Division, for joining us to make today's event possible. And with that, I would like to turn the program over to Meaghan and David.
Well, we did rock, paper, scissors for who goes first, and I got the scissors and she got the paper, so I'll take it away. My name is David Gants. I'm an associate professor of English at Florida State University, and for the past 8 years, I've been the editor of the papers of the Bibliographical Society of America. So perhaps the best way to begin would be with a brief overview background on the journal. Pbsa has been publishing regularly for over 100 years. The first issue of Volume 1 appeared in 1906, and in March we will publish the first issue of the 115th annual volume. In terms of subject matter, the journal seeks to publish scholarship on bibliographical and book history topics, including manuscripts, printing, binding, publication, distribution, collecting, textual analysis. In other words, examining the creation, dissemination, and consumption of all textual objects, physical and digital. We're particularly interested in work that explores diverse geographic, linguistic, and cultural topics, research that looks beyond Anglo-American and continental printing and publishing. We're also actively seeking submissions from young scholars just starting out, new voices who can bring perspectives to the study of bibliography and book history. The University of Chicago Press, our publishing partner, has kindly made available for Bibliography Week a selection of 14 recent articles from Pbsa that exemplify the diversity of subjects we seek to publish. And I will put the link to that page in the chat room. As you look through the list, you'll see that topics include reading licenses in Counter-Reformation Italy, the bibliographical analysis of word processing systems, the ethics of archiving zines, 19th century slave narratives, paper shortages in 1970s Chinese propaganda publishing, and early printing in Cuba, for example. As you'll see from this list as you go through it, Pbsa is more than just articles about 18th century London editions of Shakespeare. Now, I'm sure many of you are also interested in how one goes about getting scholarship published in Pbsa. Practically, The period from initial submission to final publication is about 18 to 24 months, depending on how long the peer review process takes and if there are suggested revisions to the original manuscript. For bibliographical notes, that is, shorter pieces that offer an addition or correction to existing scholarship, their turnaround time is much shorter. If you want to make my life easier, and if you want to make Meg's life easier, Pbsa follows Chicago Manual Style, 17th edition. We employ footnotes, not endnotes, and we have an in-house style sheet as a guide for authors preparing a manuscript. For this and other bibliographical information, go to the journal's webpage that I will now put into the chat room. You can find guidelines there as well as our style sheet. The submission process, actually submitting stuff to Pbsa, is through the University of Chicago Press's submission portal, and I'll put that into the chat window as well. There we go. The first time you go to the site, you'll need to create a brief author profile and account. And from then on, everything takes place electronically via email. The single most problematic aspect of submission that we found concerns images and illustrations. When you submit a piece, include the images as separate files and not embedded in the article itself. Images should be of publication quality with a pixel density of at least 300 dots per inch. And images of documents like book or manuscript pages should have even lighting and the page itself flat. And these preferably should not be taken on a smartphone. Permissions to reproduce are not required for submission, but we need to have all permissions in hand before we can release an article for publication. Acquiring public permissions can sometimes be time-consuming, so we suggest contacting the institution that holds an object being reproduced as soon as possible. Late arriving permissions is the single most common reason for publication delays. One last comment about the internet. Pbsa only accepts articles that have not been previously published, and posting on a blog or a website constitutes publication. If you have something you've published online, we will consider it if the content has been significantly revised or expanded, but it must be significant revision. So with that brief overview, I'll hand the talking stick over to Meg.
Hi, I'm Meaghan Brown. I'm the Managing and Book Reviews Editor at Pbsa. For book reviews, what we look for in a book that we would review for Pbsa is the same kinds of things that we look for in articles. Any kind of book that deals with the book as material object, whether that's manuscripts, digital, printed books of any era, any location, and any type of author. We don't tend to do biographies unless they are significant people in the book world. And we think about major editors, major publishers. We don't tend to do author biographies unless the biography has a significant portion of the story dealing with the publication, reception, or transmission of their books. If you have a book that you would like to have us consider for review, or you just think you want to go for it and send us the book, we are happy to have it. The address for books to be sent is our major address for the BSA as a whole. Please, and I'm putting that into the chat. You just address them to Erin Schreiner, although I need to update that because she's Erin McGirl now. And so we need to fix that on the website. I just copy and pasted the wrong thing. But yeah, go ahead and send us the book. We try to get them out fairly quickly. My goal is to have nothing that's more than 3 years since it's been printed. I also am fully aware that reviewing books can take some time. So if you would like to review a book, we do encourage this. I have a list of books that are currently available, and I think Kathy is going to put that into the chat. Please send me an email. You can send that to me at reviews.pbsa@bibsocmer.org. Tell me which book that piques your interest, tell me a little bit about yourself. If I get a whole deluge, I do try and pick the reviewer who's best suited to review that book. And once we get it out the door to you, we try and get them back in about 4 to 6 months. I understand there's a pandemic on, and so I'm very understanding about deadlines when it comes to reviews. So do tell me if there's something that you find interesting, or if you know of a book that I should know about that's not on the list. By all means, tell me. We may already have a review in motion for it, and we may not. So yeah, just let me know. On the subject of reviews, our reviews tend to be 1,000 words to 1,500 words. We can go a bit longer if it's a review essay, which is usually 2 to 3 books reviewed together on a greater topic with additional commentary. Those I try and keep under 3,600 words. There have been a few really long ones lately, so I'm a bit flexible about that. We do not do footnotes in most reviews. There is a very few exceptional review cases where we allow footnotes. So while we do still use the Chicago Manual style for reviews, we ask that you make parenthetical references to other works that you just referred to and refer to page numbers parenthetically. Otherwise, the style is very similar between the book reviews and the main articles and bibliographical notes. And with that, I think that we are ready for your questions. So if there is something that we haven't covered or that you would like, thanks, Aaron. Sorry about getting your name wrong. So if you want to shoot questions into the chat, we're happy to take them. And we're here to be a resource for you.
Oh, slight correction there. Let's put the questions in the Q&A.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Q&A. I am not a Zoom user on average days. So please do use the Q&A box.
And I apologize, I'm re-putting the URLs that I listed in the chat room because they were only sent to the panel, not to everybody else.
Oh, we got it taken care of.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay.
Yep. Oh. Okay, so we have a question here. Could you speak on the importance of novelty in academic publishing? Meaning, are articles which merely summarize or analyze known history still welcome, even if they do not include purely novel theories or introduce entirely new methods of scholarship? And if novelty is an absolute requirement, then could you please describe your expectations for it?
I would say that novelty is the exception rather than the rule. Much of what we do builds upon existing scholarship. I'm working right now editing something for June that re-examines B42, that re-examines the analysis of types in Gutenberg's Catholicon. And a good chunk of it is just sort of placing the scholarship that the author is putting forward in the context and explaining how it fits in. So novelty with respect to a new approach or a new theory really is, as I said, is the exception rather than the rule.
Okay, and then here's a question a couple of people are interested in. Once an article is accepted for publication, could you please describe the interaction between the editor and the author?
It depends. Some manuscripts just need a little tweaking to get them into the Chicago Manual style format. With younger scholars who perhaps are not as familiar with bibliography, the terminology and so forth, I work much more closely with the author in a collaborative sense, if you will, to make sure that it fits into the language of bibliography, some of the assumptions of bibliography. And I take I'm not daddy. I don't dictate, I only suggest. So the suggestions that I make are just that. The author can take them and leave them, but I'm open to a wide variety of different interactions with authors. In fact, I enjoy working with younger authors and helping them polish their prose.
Okay, thank you. So Carson Kepke asks, well, first he thanks you for the introductory information and then would like to know about color printing of images. Do you publish key images in an article in color or only in black and white?
We have a deal with the University of Chicago Press. They're our publishers, and they give us an annual budget of 12 color images. And so we try to encourage authors, if at all possible, not to include, we do include them, but since we have that 12 limit per year, we encourage authors to make decisions about what needs to be in color and what can be in black and white.
Okay, thank you. And how long are submissions under review before a decision is made?
The peer review process is part of the academic economy that doesn't have a lot of returns. That is, when you go for your annual review, the evaluation committee doesn't say, oh, you did a lot of peer reviews. And so sometimes it's difficult to get timely peer reviews. So all I can say is that it depends on finding the right peer reviewer and then getting the review back. Some can take a while, particularly the last year with the pandemic has really disrupted everyone's schedule. And it's been increasingly difficult to get timely peer reviews.
Okay, and let's see. Would you be willing to talk with us about the approximate word length of articles and bibliographic notes? I anticipate that might vary with conditions, but just a rough idea would be great.
The scope of a bibliographical note. Typically, they are at the most 8 to 10 pages, which would be 3,000 to 4,000 words. I think a page of Pbsa is about 350 words. So 3,000, 3,500 words.
And what about
unlike book reviews, we do allow footnotes in bibliographical notes.
Okay, and what about book reviews? The length for book reviews?
The book review length is 1,500 words for a typical book review. We can go up to 3,600 for something that's a review essay.
Okay, and here's an interesting one for both of you too. To what extent should bibliographical journals continue to produce their journals in print?
I've been told that Pbsa makes good bathtub reading. Your mileage may vary on that. It is a good handy size. David, get into the philosophical level on that one.
Well, and those of you who are librarians know the locks principle. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. I'm a proponent of printing physical copies, not only because they look nice on the wall, but because it's a backup. Think of it as a backup to the electronic edition.
Okay. So here's another question from Emily Brooks. Is Pbsa interested in interdisciplinary articles? For example, scholarship that overlaps book materiality with popular culture?
Yes.
Certainly. Certainly, and the article that I mentioned earlier, the ethics of archiving zines, is a perfect example. It's an overlap between library practices of archiving and the very much popular culture-oriented phenomena of zines in the 1990s and 2000s.
Okay, so I think we've taken care of all of the questions that have been sent in so far. Is anything coming to anyone else's mind that you want to type to us here? Oh, here's one. What do you see as some of the distinctions between a straight rejection and a revise and submit?
If you ask my students, they'll tell you that I'm a softie. So we don't have that many straight rejections. If a peer reviewer says this is not appropriate for Pbsa, I usually go along, but usually they'll say you need to revise and submit. And that's when there are questions with the submission, it almost always results in revise and submit. It's up to the author whether they want to revise and resubmit. But outright rejections don't happen that often.
Well, that's kind of you. And here is somebody who is asking any general advice for novices or people who are otherwise unsure of themselves as bibliographers.
Try. The peer review comments can often be helpful as you move forward because they can see the kinds of things that your research is bringing up for other people in the field. So you have an opportunity to take those comments, and they might not be 100% what you need at that moment. Sometimes a reviewer will ping on something that isn't what you're aiming for, but that can also be informative because then it can tell you that maybe they were looking for something in your article that it wasn't trying to offer, or maybe it's another avenue for you to explore. So you can use the peer review process as a way to get feedback. And we have no problem with that. Try us.
And I just second what Meg said. The feedback that you get from peer reviewers is often along two lines. One, the quality of the research and scholarship. Does it fit in? Does it make substantive arguments that are backed up with evidence? But frequently peer reviewers will also offer, God bless their souls, will offer prosaic advice on composition. If there's a weakness in the structure of the piece, they'll often offer a suggestion there. I know in my own submissions to other journals, I've been so thankful that an editor said, well, the order of the sections doesn't quite fit. And they always made my work much stronger. And so, yes, the peer review process will help you in your scholarship, but it'll also help you in your writing. And we can all use help improving our writing.
Okay, so here is a question that's following up on one earlier. Did I understand you to say before that novelty is more an exception? You also said that interdisciplinary approaches are very welcome, but interdisciplinary approaches can often themselves be novel. That is the very idea of bringing some other field together with bibliography is being novel. So could you explain your thoughts about novelty a little more?
I guess what I'm sort of stumbling over is the idea of novelty. Is it certainly novelty in a breakthrough, revolutionary new approach isn't something that happens very often. And that's the thing I'm saying is more the exception than the rule. However, the novel combinations of different disciplines is not that common, but it's certainly something that we would welcome if it makes sense. If the juxtaposition of two disciplines, the juxtaposition of two approaches reveals new insights, that would be lovely.
Okay, and here is another one regarding revise and submission, or revise and resubmit, I think. Would you like to tell us the review process in general after a revised version is submitted?
Typically, typically, revise and resubmit. It goes through the initial peer review process. I send the suggestions, the reviewer suggestions back to the author. And then when the revision comes in, it's my call. I don't send it out for another peer review. I go through, I'll read it again, assess it, and make my own judgment.
Okay, great. Now, how interested are you in submissions on pre-modern topics such as medieval or Renaissance subjects?
We'd love them if they had to do with, Mesoamerica.
I love them even when they don't have to do it. No, I'm an early modernist, and I love them. We do get a lot of them.
Yeah.
We get a lot more Renaissance submissions than medieval, and we get a lot more Renaissance and 18th century submissions based in Europe than almost anything else. So we are very interested in diversifying subject matter, but that doesn't mean you're not going to get a good reading if you come to us with a solid, even Shakespeare play based article, as much as David is giving people grief about that. Yeah, no, we're happy to see Renaissance and medieval subjects.
We don't see as much medieval because there are other outputs or outlets. I mean, there are four. There are four major, okay, I'm making a qualitative judgment. There are four long-standing journals, and they each have their own sort of flavor. Pbsa for the longest time has been obviously American printing and publishing, but also European. The library focuses much more closely on European printing and publishing and Renaissance materials. Book history is not as much, it's the sociological, biographical, and narrative side of bibliographical analysis. And studies in bibliography has been not so much period specific as approach specific. So there's a lot of hardcore bibliography and studies in bibliography, textual analysis, that sort of thing. But that's all to say, we would, early modern medieval stuff is great. We publish some of it, and we'd like to publish even more.
And I like reading it, so.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So how common is it for submissions not to follow the very clear and thorough instructions on the University of Chicago Press website?
Amazingly common. Very common. We work with you to some extent. I saw a question earlier about anonymization, and I am usually the first line of defense on the anonymization route. I will remove your name if you forget to from the cover page. And usually, if you're doing self-references, you can get around that by just putting a little square bracket that says, self-reference, and then, to be reinserted when accepted or something. Otherwise, I have to skim the footnotes and do it for you. We do take out self-references in footnotes, thank yous. You can put them back in at a later stage of editing, but we do take out thank yous, which often appear in the first footnote, and the name on the cover page. And that's the instruction I see ignored the most, I think.
And whether or not you format at Chicago has no bearing on whether it's accepted or not. In the last year, I've had 3 or 4 articles where the bulk of my time was just formatting at Chicago. The article itself was fine, but I spent a lot of time just fixing all the footnotes. It was a great article, and there was no problem. But the fact that the authors didn't follow Chicago had nothing to do with whether it was accepted or not. So
you do the correcting then if it's in a different format otherwise?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's very nice of you.
We never send back, revise, and resubmit to make sure that it's Chicago. That formatting is not part of the review process.
Well, that's nice to know. Are there any limits to the number of black and white illustrations with a paper, assuming they are relevant and needed to explain what is said in the text?
Go
I've
nuts.
never come across any.
We've
know.
had some heavily illustrated pieces. And as long as you can do it in black and white, you get a lot.
Okay, great. Let's see. What is the general acceptance rate for articles?
Over the last, I knew this question was going to come up, so I went back and I looked. Over the last 3 to 4 years, including revise and resubmit that have been accepted, 80%.
Okay, and so if an article submitted is evidently interdisciplinary, would it be peer reviewed by readers in the different fields, or are the reviewers always first and foremost experts in bibliography?
Oh, we choose peer reviewers based on the subject matter.
So would it get 2 peer reviewers, one in, from each field?
If the article requires it, certainly.
Yeah. And do we have any other questions that anyone would like to type in here?
Well, you guys have all been grand, so. And I would hope, I do hope I see some interdisciplinary articles coming through after this.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So Stacy Nicole Voss says, I have one. Oh, and here's one from Farley Katz. Can you tell us any MRE about, any more about the B42 article?
It's examining, it's trying to identify individual types from the Gutenberg press using suspensions over letters. So rather than looking at the letters themselves, it's using as the focus of the analysis, the suspensions. It's not very long, it's maybe 12, 14 pages, and it's got a lot of pictures.
We are a subject matter that lends itself towards illustration.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so here is a question from Stacy Nicole Voss. I'm wondering if you could speak to general trends in the field of bibliography that you think are exciting and promising for us to keep in mind as writers in the field.
Been seeing some really interesting new work on digital bibliography, by which I mean bibliography of born digital materials. We've had a couple reviews of, we have a review coming out shortly of early English books online, and I would like to see more reviews of digital projects. And so if you have a digital project that you know about that you would like to do a review of, by all means, solicit me. So there's, that's two slightly tangential angles, right? Because you've got things like the history of track changes that we had a few years ago, and things like this review of early English books online coming out, which is a digital project that focuses on early print, but presents it in a new and much more accessible way for many users. So I'm hoping to see more on both of those angles, personally.
I'm heartened to see an increase in, and excited by, an increase in submissions that aren't Anglo-American continental printing. The one that I mentioned earlier, the early Cuban printing press was a really exciting piece. And the one that came out just recently on paper shortages in 1970s Maoist China, it was hardcore bibliography, but it was fascinating stuff. And I'd really like to see non-English language publications. One of my dreams is to have a bilingual article with translations on either recto and verso. It would be a challenge in terms of editing and formatting, but it would be incredibly invigorating for people who are trying to think outside the box of Anglo-American printing.
Okay, do we have any more questions? If you're typing one right now, just send us a message that it's on the way. Okay, we got one here. Yes, I am still very interested in these questions about interdisciplinary approaches. You said that you welcome articles that bring together the field of bibliography with some other subject area if it makes sense to bring those fields together. Given how deeply texts and their embodiment affect so many areas of human experience, what would be an example of an area of human knowledge or activity whose study would not benefit from bringing that field together with bibliographical approaches?
I feel like there's a theory argument here.
Yeah.
And that way lies a trap.
I can just think of ways that would be interesting.
Yeah.
A textual analysis of Twitter feeds.
And I think there's a scholar who's doing that.
Yeah.
Several of them, actually. And if anyone would like to publish that, I would be interested in textual analysis of Twitter's feeds and the ways they populate.
Okay, and Mark Banley, who asked that question, says he too can only think of connections that would be interesting.
I think social media is or sociopath media in many cases. I think social media is an area it's just asking to be examined in a book history and bibliographical fashion.
Okay, anyone else? You're getting a lot of thank yous here.
We're glad you found it useful.
Yes.
I put my email into the chat earlier, but please do feel free to shoot me a message if one of those books caught your eye. I saw a lot of people looking. We may be a little slow in getting the books out at the moment, but we will get it to you. And we will not count your starting of your 4 months until you get it. So do feel free to jump up.
Now, some people had questions. They weren't able to access the books.
I think we fixed that.
Okay, great. Great. I found that I needed to be logged into Google to access it, but okay.
Could I just make a pitch for my own, my own private bête noire?
As long as it's interesting.
One of the things that I notice among young scholars is that they're not familiar with the vocabulary of bibliography, just the basic terminology we use, the difference between a page and a leaf. What does recto and verso mean? What is an issue? What is an edition? And so I could make a pitch for Rare Book School. It's a nice, efficient, 1 week way of just getting general familiarity with the field that you're interested in investigating. I've for the last 25 years, I've helped teach the Introduction to Descriptive Bibliography course. And that's one of the things that people leave that course with, is the vocabulary of bibliographical analysis and book history.
Okay, so we do have another question here for you.
Yeah.
Have you ever run into a submission where it looked like you wanted to send it out to referees, but it was on a subject where you either had a difficult time finding a referee who was a specialist in that area, or the only potential referees you knew had some kind of connection with their author, like she was their dissertation advisor or something? If so, what did you do?
It's hard to be truly esoteric.
I actually recently had one. It was a submission about the development of characters in Chosun Korean calligraphy. And I asked the author for suggestions.
Okay.
I took the author at the author's word that there wasn't any collusion.
Okay, so if there are not any more questions, we could go ahead and end this session. We have about 17 minutes left.
Oh, I see one
So-
more.
Oh,
I can say something about image quality. Higher DPI is better. But 300 DPI, which is dots per inch, is about the minimum. Nowadays, most cell phones actually take something along those lines, but we'd recommend having professional photography done if at all possible. Many libraries are now doing quite excellent photography or allowing it in their libraries. So the higher resolution you can get, the better it will print.
And I dissuaded people from using cell phones, not because cell phones are bad, but because the conditions of photography are such that you get waffly images and wrinkles, and the lighting is bad.
You
Not
often
cell phones,
cannot
it's the
control the lighting situation.
Sorry?
You often cannot control the lighting situation when you're taking it in the library itself.
Yes, but
in an
particularly
environment.
if you're doing color images, because you're not going to get a full spectrum light in most libraries. So you don't get true colors.
okay. So is this, do we have any more questions coming in? This is last call. Okay. Mark Danley says, thanks for the advice for younger scholars. It seems like it would apply to folks like me who are older but coming from other disciplines and have discovered the relevance of bibliography to our fields. Any advice for us? People who have come from other disciplines and are now discovering how important bibliography is, how relevant.
Spread the gospel.
Hallelujah. Bring the knowledge from your existing discipline and let it inform bibliography.
Let us benefit from that cross-pollination too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all. This has been really wonderful. You had really great questions. Do get in touch with either of us if something else comes up. We're happy to answer more.
Yes, and I put my email address in the chat window as well.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
I'll do it
okay.
again.
It's
Yep.
yeah.